I've helped hundreds of students get grade 9s at GCSEs across the board. This is the surefire guide for you to get grade 9s across all your subjects. I've studied at Oxford University and the University of Birmingham, and my full-time profession is to help you guys get the best grades possible. Now I guarantee there'll be at least one gem in here, if not more, that you've never heard of before. So stay tuned and let's get cracking. Now the methodology you need to use to get grade 9. Number 1, what top students do and their habits. Number 2, what academic literature says about these studying techniques. And number 3, personal advice or mentoring or coaching, whatever you would want to say. So I like to call this TAP for short. As I'm going through my recommendations in this video, I'm going to be highlighting which of these 3 points are allocated to that recommendation. Now we're going to start with the easiest and we're going to build our way to the hardest. We'll start with level 1, where you're a bit of a noob, you're a bit of an amateur, and you don't really know what you're doing. So let's get into this. At level 1, we're looking to get started. This involves something called the Zeigarnik Effect, where once you get started, you're more likely to complete the task. So a lot of students just simply haven't started. As the saying goes, best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago. The next best time is today. Whilst you're on level 1, you need to work really hard to even have a chance at doing well. So what does working hard at this stage mean?
There's no easy way around it. No matter how talented you are, your talent is going to fail you if you're not skilled. You know, if you don't study, if you don't work really hard and dedicate yourself to being better every single day, you'll never be able to communicate with people, with your artistry, the way that you want.
Talent without hard work fails. You need to be the last person remaining in the race. There can be no other victor. Working hard means working approximately 4 hours per day on a school day. When I went to Oxford and studied with the brightest and sharpest minds, what I noticed was that the students there had a certain routine, they had certain habits that they brought into their revision. If you're not working 4 hours per day, I guess you're not really hitting that benchmark for level 1. What about on a weekend or holidays, for example, Easter? Well, you should be working about 8 hours of work. And I really like this philosophy of 8 hours of play, 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep. What's the longest time limit that you should study? Should you study 8 hours in a row? No, you should study for whatever the time limit is for your longest exam. So let's say your English literature exam is 2 hours and 15 minutes. That's how long your longest revision session should always be. And the final point you need to understand on level 1 is that not all schools are created equal. It's a very common trap that I see students fall into. They only look at their small circle of friends or the set that they might be in and might think, oh, I'm doing relatively well in comparison to my mates, you know, I'll be okay. But actually you need to realize that you need to look outside of your set in your school. You are actually competing against kids from other schools. So you're competing against the likes of Westminster School and, you know, Harrow and Eton and, you know, the likes of the private schools across the UK. That is level 1. Well done for getting this far. You are now on level 2. So the way I look at it is that you need to master your foundation. The foundation is super important. If you don't have mastery of the foundation, then your overall grade will just come crumbling down. If your foundation on grade 4, grade 5, whatever, right, is weak, then you ain't really got a chance in hell to get a grade 9. So if I look at a few subject specific points, so for example, for maths, what would be the foundation? I would literally consider the foundation as making sure you know your mental maths really fast. Mental maths is kind of like being natural with numbers. If I say to you 11 times 12, you should be like this, 132. If you can't do that, then I'm afraid your foundations are weak. You need to be able to say and work out these questions in a split second. And this isn't something that's worked on in schools because they assume that you know this from primary school. Number 2, in maths, I would make sure you know your negative numbers. You would be surprised by how many students struggle with negative numbers. And finally, you should be able to do algebra properly. And what I mean by doing algebra properly is being able to rearrange equations, but know why you're rearranging equations. Trying to get x on its own and to get rid of something, you need to do the opposite. Finally, what you do to one side, you do to the other. And that's what leads to something going to the other side. It's about understanding why. And that's what mastery of foundation means. Let's look at English. Now, English is something that takes a while to improve, but the foundation of English is reading books. So if you've got time on your hands, start reading. So if you're in year 7, 8, 9, start reading. Let's say you're in year 11 and you don't have much time left. what do? Well, there are still other foundational areas that you can work on. For example, knowing the structure of your paper. So English language paper, for example, never ever changes. Let's say you're doing AQA English language. You will have 5 questions. Those 5 questions never ever change. Only thing that changes is what they ask you in those individual questions. Know the structure of the English paper and you'll be in a solid place. And then let's look at science as another example of how to master a foundational topic. In science, what I would advise is that you understand science is just observation of real life. For example, if you were a 3-year-old child, you're having a tantrum.
I'm in tantrum position.
You're like, oh, I'm really angry, I'm gonna throw something. You see a pencil or a table. What do you throw? You throw the pencil, obviously, because you realize, hey, this is quite light, I can throw this. You may not have understood the fact that you're talking about kinetic energy there. The lighter object takes less effort. So you see how you didn't need to be in a physics class to understand science. And that's really important in mastering the foundation. Once you understand the principles, it's a lot easier to memorize things. It's a lot easier to answer questions. So my one tip to master the foundation in science is really take a step back and say, hey, how does this work in real life? I'm not going to go through every single subject, obviously, because this video is going to get too long. The main thing you need to think about is, have I mastered the foundation in this subject? How can we strengthen our mastery of the foundation? There is one technique which you may have heard of in the past. It is known and named after a very famous physicist, Richard Feynman, known as the Feynman technique. You take a really complicated concept, let's say a GCSE level concept, and you try to explain that to a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old child. If they can understand it, then you truly understand it. Now, you may not have a sibling that's younger than you. I remember a vivid incident from my time at Oxford with a friend of mine. Right, I was sleeping in his room. I was sleeping on the floor. I was hoping that he was going to turn the lights off, and then I just see him standing there next to the whiteboard that he had in his room. And I said to him, what are you doing? Switch the light off. We've got like exam or whatever tomorrow, right? Revision to do. And then he's like, oh, I'm teaching my imaginary class. I was like, eh? And he was like, yeah, these guys, these imaginary guys, they're asking me questions and I'm really simplifying it down for them. At that time, I thought he was a bit cuckoo. But since then, I've realized what he was doing was actually a very effective technique. And I've since known that this is called the Feynman technique. So even if you don't have friends, make imaginary friends. That's how you get grade 9s, have imaginary friends. Us humans, we forget about 80% of the stuff that we learn by the next day. So if you're not writing it down, how do you expect to remember it? But what you can do is you can make brief and succinct notes using the specification. That's very important, to stick to what you need to know and then go from there. So I'm going to do a little plug for our on-demand course where we go in depth and in detail on how to get these grade 9s in specific subjects. Link down below in the description. If you haven't been living under a rock and you've been following any study YouTubers for any length of time, you now know the famous concept of active recall. Some schools are now finally cottoning on to this as well, which is the usage of active recall. So active recall refers to really practicing something by testing yourself actively. And the best way we can do that is by doing exam papers. You should do the foundation papers first. I know they don't exist for all subjects, but for the subjects that they do exist for, and the way I would do them is I would start with the old spec because there's not enough new spec papers. If you can get 90% on those consistently, let's say 3 to 5 papers, on average you've got 90%, then you go to the new spec foundation papers. Now, if you can average 90% on those, then you get to go to the higher papers. A lot of students have these holes in their knowledge, which they don't realize because they haven't been attempting the foundation papers. Surprisingly, if you can score 90+% on the foundation papers, you'll realize that actually you're almost on a grade 7. Higher paper has about 40% of the content is foundation based. And if you score 40% on a higher paper, that's a grade 6. So if you do the maths, you very quickly realize that if you score like a few extra marks, you're already on a grade 7 just by working on the foundation papers. One of the things that I think is quite unique to the students that I've taught in the past to get a grade 9 is using this benchmarking thing that we have. A benchmarking file is effectively where you record your results in detail. So you record how long you took, which paper you did, what mistakes you made, You know, did you do it again? Did you do it under exam conditions? Did you do it under open book test? What did you do? And this is a really good tracker to see if you're making progress. And this is something I've brought in from my days as a consultant in the technology industry. And it's something that I'm afraid teachers simply don't utilize enough. And if they did, I think a lot more students would get a lot higher grades than they currently do. You may start off scoring really low marks, like maybe 30%, 20%. I always say to students is that it's okay to score even 0% as long as you are learning from your mistakes. It's all about failing fast. And you can see a newsletter where I talk about failing fast, the newsletters that I do every week with lots of information on how to improve your grades and just education related stuff, or even just fun stuff about starting businesses and even working for Udemy. Make sure you sign up. It's completely free and it comes straight to your inbox. Life is all about failing. I have failed so many times in life.
More than you believe. More than you believe.
Now let's get on to level 3, the big boy level. Now that you've done all of level 1, all of level 2, you now need to start memorizing the content. How do you memorize? Well, there's a surefire 2-way route that I recommend if you want to go for a grade 9. Number 1 is rote learning. Really use that to absolutely smash whatever you need to learn. So with rote learning, all you're doing is effectively you are being studious in how you're writing this stuff down, you're covering it up, and you're really learning it in a really effective manner. And I've memorized tons and tons of pages through this method. And then the other thing that I would recommend is using flashcards. I am planning on making a separate video, but I'm just going to go into a few pertinent points. What you want to do is you want to write the question down on one side and then the answer on the other side. But here's the thing. A lot of students try to put 10 questions on one side and maybe 10 answers on the other side. No, you don't want to do that. You want to limit it to one topic, one question on one side and the answer on the other side. So if it's, I don't know, a list of items that you need to remember, or it's a process that you need to remember, try to get it down to about 3 to 5 items, because our brain remembers in a short-term memory only in chunks of 3 to 5 items. Every time you make a mistake on your paper, you go and write that mistake question down on one side on the flashcard and then the answer on the other side, and then you use it whenever, at bedtime, at breakfast, on the bus, on the train, in your breaks in school. You test yourself on it. If you know it, you put it in the I know it pile, and if you don't know it, you put in the I don't know it pile. And then what you do is you periodically go back to the I don't know it pile and you continue working through that until you have 0 flashcards left in the I don't know it pile. So other alternatives are Anki and Quizlet, which allow you to kind of automate your revision a bit. But the problem with Anki and Quizlet is that, can you really trust the sources that you have available? So if you make your own flashcards on there, which are thoroughly researched and they are credible, then great. I'm old school and I prefer using the flashcards, as they are super handy wherever you are, whether you have a phone, whether you got internet. You can really avoid distractions by having manual and old school things like paper and pen and cards. And that's what I would go with. Now, another thing you can do on a flashcard is number the items. So if you got, like, say 5 items, number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because your memory requires a location for items that is remembering. Continuing with the theme of active recall and papers, you've done the foundation papers in level 2. Now you're really hammering on the higher papers. And what you want to do, again, you want to work with the old spec papers where there aren't enough new spec papers. So with the exception of maths, where there's about 50 odd new spec papers that you can find. In most other subjects, you don't have enough new spec papers. So what you need to do is you need to go and dig up the old spec papers and work through them. Content hasn't really changed from the old spec to the new spec. Like, since I studied science, the only thing that's really changed is that Pluto is not a planet anymore. I've even spoken to examiners who've mentioned that they've been instructed to go back to the old spec papers and look for certain question types as far back as 2001, 2002. So this is really interesting that a lot of people and teachers tend to shun old spec papers, yet they have a lot of credibility, A, in getting you practice, and B, just giving you that breadth and depth of exploration of the different topic ranges. What's important is that you have to make sure by the time your exam starts, you have done all of the new spec papers available to you. Maybe some of them twice. What does this look like in terms of quantity for a top student? Now, based on my data, which we have accrued for students who've got A stars and A's and grade 9s over, hundreds of students, the number that is required for an average student to get a grade 8, grade 9 is 70 papers. 70 papers. Yes, you have to do 70 papers per subject to guarantee yourself a grade 9. No grade boundaries, they don't mean jack. For you to get a grade 9, you need to be scoring 90+% on higher papers. That's it. That is the only number that you should be concerned about. So aim for that and work your way up. Use the mark schemes. You'll often find top students huddling around, at the cafeteria and saying,
"Hey, have you learnt the mark scheme for this paper? Hey, have you learnt the mark scheme for this paper?"
And alternatively known as pattern recognition. You go through the mark scheme enough times for a paper that you start recognizing the pattern. Okay, that's all exams are. Unfortunately, I hate to break it to you, the exams really aren't testing how smart you are. They are testing, can you recognize patterns? Because what tends to happen for a grade 9 student, right, they would have seen 80% of the question paper already across the, the 70 plus papers that they've done. They would have seen majority of the questions already. And there'll be about 10% to 20% of questions which will be slightly, maybe challenging, where they have to apply a bit of thinking, but they should really be able to do that. A lot of subjects have a grade 8 to 9 workbooks. For example, in maths and science, I recommend that you guys purchase the CGP and the Collins workbook. Watch out and don't order the grade 1 to 9 textbook. That's not what I'm talking about. A lot of students think that,
"Oh yeah, my school gave me this grade 1 to 9 workbook."
No, I don't care about that. What I care about is the grade 8 to 9 workbook. Yeah, if you get that, then you can focus on the really high level questions. Work through those questions and really strengthen your high level topic question understanding now. I'll put the link in description below for these and you can purchase them directly from Amazon. One of the things that you can do in English is recognize that 50% of your English exam is based on creative writing. So that's non-fiction and one for fiction. You can actually prepare essays and get feedback on these essays and really go into an exam with a clear idea of different types of essays and how you would write them. In essence, you're guaranteeing yourself marks in the exam. This applies for both fiction and non-fiction. There's a limited number of titles. You can write essays that are grade 9 standards outside of the exam, under no pressure, at home, get your essay up to a grade 9 standard. Then you've got a much better chance of writing a grade 9 essay in exam conditions. How do you expect to go in exam conditions for the first time, write a grade 9 essay on a haunted house if you've never written one before? So there's about 20-25 drafts that I would say you need to write for fiction, and something similar for non-fiction, right? Essay-based subjects, you have to get feedback. You cannot mark them yourself. So as a thank you for the first 1,000 guys watching this video, you guys can get your free essay marked by our official examiner and get feedback on it. So write as many draft essays as you want to get your standard up to a grade 9. In any essay-based subject, I want you to write 70 essays before you tell me you're not good enough at English or at any essay-based subject. Until you've written 70 essays, how can you tell me that you're not good at English? Now here I refer to Ali Abdaal's retrospective timetable. I've modified it slightly, but the idea stays the same, where you're looking at all of your list of topics that you need to learn, and from there you're identifying which one you're the weakest on, and number 2, which one you've done the longest time ago. Now that gives you the greatest benefit because you are likely to pick up the most marks there. So imagine if you were to study a topic that you're really good at. Let's say you're a 4 out of 5 on it. If you study that, you might be able to gain that 1 extra mark. But if you study the topics that you're weakest on, let's say you're 1 out of 5 on it, if you study that, you've got the potential to gain an additional 4 marks. You can interlock this retrospective timetable with something like the flashcards. So you're looking at your weakest topics, you're using your flashcards on those weakest topics, and then seeing if you can change the color from red to yellow to green. One of the other ways that you can improve yourselves is by doing mock exams. So these can be done at school, these can be done by third parties, or even your parents could create some sort of a mock exam type of environment. What you really want to do is you want to create this pressure cooker environment. You are feeling the realistic pressure of the exam. Because what tends to happen often is, you're sitting there in your pajamas doing the paper, you're pretty relaxed. At home you might be scoring 90% in your pajamas, but when you go to the real exam, under exam pressure, you wilt and maybe you drop to 70%. If you're watching this in 2022, then there has been additional information that has been released. What can you do with that additional information? What I would suggest is that you make a sticky note or one of these little tabs, and then you stick them onto your notes folder at each relevant part. So for example, I would do a priority list. So number 1 is things that they've specifically mentioned are going to be tested. Number 2 would be things that they have not mentioned that will be tested, because just because they haven't mentioned it doesn't mean that they can't be tested. They will definitely still be tested. So you need to work on them, but just a bit less priority than number 1. And number 3, you will look at all practicals, for example, if you're doing a science-based subject, right? So those 3 are like your order of priority. And number 4 would be topics that are definitely mentioned as not being included. Okay, so you may only really want to look at this if you've absolutely smashed all your revision for all of your subjects and you want to do wider reading, because let's say you are going to study that subject at A level, because if you are, you need that understanding. Now we're really getting into the advanced techniques, and one of the advanced techniques is working from the back. Let's look at some papers, like for example English. You have the 2 big 25% each questions on English language at the end. So if you work when you're freshest into the exam on the hardest questions at the back and the ones that are worth the most, doesn't that make sense? Why would you start from the front when you only get like what, 2 marks in some English language papers or 4 marks in some exam boards? And the same actually applies to other exams. So here we're going to look at what the science exam paper suggests, how the difficulty of the questions increase as we go towards the end. Another thing that I've come across in the past for some students is, you know, sometimes the exam question is on the last page and students don't realize there's a question on the last page, and because they don't turn over. So if you work from the back, there's no way you're going to miss question 1. You need some one-to-one mentoring or advice. Okay, this doesn't mean you need a tutor. Nowadays, most students, if you're at a grammar school or a private school, have a tutor. But that's not what I'm plugging here. What I'm saying to you is you need to speak to someone, okay? That could be a school teacher, that could be a tutor, that could be someone in the years above who's been through what you've been through, and really gain some feedback on a one-to-one level on these specific topics. As you get close to the exam, group sessions aren't that beneficial to you. They add a bit of value, but really what you should be doing in group sessions or in your school classes is asking those individual questions that are relevant to you. Specific queries are better than generalized lessons. Predicted questions. For some subjects, you can have predicted questions. For example, if you're doing maths, which usually has 3 papers, for example, for most exam boards, you will maybe have done the first paper and you will know what questions have come up on there. Therefore, people can predict what topics that haven't come are likely to come up on paper 2 and 3, and you can focus a bit more on that. Now I'd like to talk to you about the concept of ramping up. Oh, this is a biggie. This is my favorite biggie. The separator for grade 9s and the grade 6s and the grade 7s and the 8s is the top students. They ramp up for a particular subject with absolute laser focus, whilst the others, they'll do, oh, I'll do a bit of maths, I'll do a bit of geography, I'll do a bit of art, and then you're like, you know, you're averaging your work out. Okay, and that doesn't really help you. Some quick other points. Should you study with music? Absolutely not. No music is better than non-lyrical music, which is better than lyrical music. So lyrical music is the worst. Then you got non-lyrical music, and no music is the best. I've not seen one student that has had unlimited access to a phone or a device such as PlayStation or a computer and doing well in the exams. Not one student in all of the students that I've ever taught. So if you got a phone, get rid of it and get a brick phone. If you don't have a phone, great. Level 3 students also realize that the myth about video, audio, kinesthetic learner, all of this type of learning preferences and styles and kind of stuff, this is all a myth. So if you have school teachers in your school that have been peddling this, please do inform them and tell them to sort their act out.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
The final thing I want to finish off on, it's similar to how we started. We want to talk about mindset. And the mindset that you should have here if you want to get a grade 9 is you can put the effort in. And then if you don't get the result, then that's not in your control. You need to focus on what is in your control. So you can you do 70 papers? Can you do some mock papers? Can you ask your teacher individual specific questions? Can you ensure that you're not studying with music? Can you ensure that you don't have a phone at hand when you're studying? And so on and so forth. So if you do these techniques, you'll surely find yourself at the real top end of your school, if not at a grade 9. There are like millions of steps here. How do you get started? Well, As this famous Oriental saying goes, 1,000-mile journey starts with a single step. You've got the theory, now let's get cracking and put it into practice. And here's a video on how you're going to memorize the content.